My name is Shyam Mehta. I'm an analyst at GTM Research, and I'm moderating the next panel, which is titled Crowdsourced Market Insight, Solar's Biggest Questions. So this is one of our most popular sessions historically. This is one of our most popular sessions historically. And it's been a fixture at GTM conferences for the last couple of years. It's the only session that's going to actually be interactive. So the way it works, just some housekeeping rules before we start. I'll be posing a series of questions to our panel here, whose expertise pretty much covers the entire gamut of the solar spectrum. And after a signal, a timer will start, and all of you will be voting on these questions. They're basically multiple choice questions. And so will our panel members. And after a 10-second period of time, we'll be discussing your reaction. They will be pushing your reaction on the screen. And we'll be discussing panel's answers and your answers together. So just a few sort of housekeeping rules before we start. You all should have one of these clickers. It looks like this. If you don't have one, then just raise your hand and one will be provided to you. So the clicker, as you can see, the buttons basically correspond to different multiple choice selections. So the one thing you want to do is make sure that you vote after the timer starts, and the timer will start in, it'll be a little green sort of circle on the corner of the screen here. And you can only vote once, so make sure your vote counts. And also, I'm told that there is a way to change your vote, but we're not getting into that because it's very complicated. So let's be decisive, everyone. So let's, before we get started, I'm going to give our panelists a chance to introduce themselves. We have representatives from Conergy, Vivint Solar, Sungage, and Hudson Clean Energy Partners here, starting with Yann.
Good morning. My name is Yann Brandt. I'm the Global Head of Marketing and PR, as well as VP of Sales in the US for Conergy, and we're a global downstream solar development firm.
Hi, I'm Neil Auerbach, the CEO and Managing Partner of Hudson Clean Energy Partners, about $1.5 billion of assets under management, and have been in the solar industry proudly for over 10 years.
Hi everyone, my name is Sara Ross. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Sungage Financial. We're a financing platform focused on making solar simple, easy, and affordable for homeowners.
Good morning, Greg Butterfield, President and CEO of Vivint Solar, residential solar company, distributed generation solar company.
Great. So as you can see, we have some pretty established credentials here to opine on these big questions. So let's get started with our first question, which is, what will be the most critical determinant of solar's continued growth over the next decade? So this is a pretty, let's start with, this is a pretty high-level question here. And the options are as follows. First option is continued reduction in system/levelized costs. Number 2 is the emergence of economical storage solutions. Number 3 is continuing policy or incentive mechanisms. 4 is consumer education. And 5 is fossil fuel price increases. So let's start that timer right now, and once the timer starts, you can start voting. Okay, we've begun. Okay, so it's a very neat looking curve. I mean, it's symbolic, I guess, right? So looks like the overwhelming majority have voted for continued reduction in system and levelized costs. So basically, solar has to keep doing what it's doing. And then after that, storage, almost a little bit surprising to me, is number 2. Policy incentive mechanisms, number 3. Consumer education, and at the very end, we have fossil fuel price increases, which to me suggests that we have a pretty sophisticated and savvy audience. So now I'm going to turn to you guys. Yann, what did you vote for?
I take the key word of the question of continued growth, and if we actually want continued growth on the pace that we're on, I voted for number 3, because if we do actually reach a sunset, which I don't think will happen, and we don't fight the policy fights where, as you heard in the last panel, we want to reduce access to net metering, interconnection, access to the grid for distributed generation resources, we will have smaller growth, no growth in markets, et cetera. So I actually think policy is the most important.
And when you say policy, are you referring specifically to any one policy, the ITC perhaps, or sort of a broader perspective on that?
Well, on a federal level, it's the ITC. On the state level, it's access to fair and open policies that aren't favoring incumbent participants. So I think we have to fight both fights, and that's why it's important for every company in this room to make sure that they're engaged in policy.
Gotcha. Neil.
Yes, I also noted the way the question was phrased. I voted for one, so I voted with most of the crowd. If the question was phrased in the negative, what could actually hurt the most for solar's continued growth, I probably would have gone with number 3, because I think we all believe here that the biggest threat is actually now happening at the state level, where utilities are trying to figure out how to slow this juggernaut. But the way that the question was phrased really hinted that number 3 was more about the federal ITC, and while I'm a strong proponent of its continuation, I don't think that it is as important as continuing to reduce costs in terms of seeing solar become ubiquitous, which it is slowly on the way to becoming.
So I'm going to take a kind of a different take at this question. To me, 1, 3, and 5 are all sides of the same, like, it's economics stupid, right? And you can adjust 1, 3, and 5 to kind of get back to the same economics in a variety of ways, right? But what's striking to me about 5 is that it's the push factor, right? When that consumer opens the bill and gets that higher bill as consumers in Massachusetts did, it's the push to bring them to our laps to say, hey, solar, what can you do for me, right? So I think that's what gets us in the conversation around reduced levelized costs and interesting storage opportunities and the great policies that we have to support solar. But that's the push, right? So if this is a status quo bias problem, it's helpful to have that push sending consumers our way.
Right. So you pointed to 1, 3, and 5, but you obviously didn't vote for all 3 because you can't. So what did you vote?
So I did vote for 5. Not that we need additional increases, but just it's what creates the space in the consumer's mind to come to solar.
Right.
Right.
Greg.
Yeah, like the others, the way the question's phrased, I voted for number 1, continued reduction in levelized cost. But that's more of a survival mode. I do think that number 2, having a way to have co-opetition, or a way, as Shell talked about earlier today, to work with utility companies is more of a growth strategy. And then we all know that PV, the market and industry in general, is based off of public policy. And it happened in Europe. I mean, it was very favorable towards renewable, and you had high growth, and you look at turned less favorable, and as a result, you've seen a decrease. And so I vote number 1 based on the way the question's asked, but I think number 2 and number 3 are the ones that really provide the growth in the market to have sustainability.
Right, great. So that was interesting. It seems that all of you are sensitive to the way the question was phrased,
Yes.
which, it's a bit of a veiled criticism, but we'll take that feedback. All right. So perhaps not the most exciting answer in terms of, the most popular choice and what our panelists discussed, but I think it's pretty sobering and highlights the continued importance of cost competitiveness. All right, let's see what our second question has in store for us. Which adjacent technology will have the biggest impact on solar over the next 10 years? 1, energy storage. 2, home energy management. 3, EVs. 4, demand response. And 5, something else. So let's start the timer, and then you can start voting. And I'll be saying this again and again and again.
We need some background music.
Yeah. Do, 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 do. Wow. 75+% voted for number 1 here. And second is EVs. So clearly it's a very storage-oriented audience, storage-focused audience here. Yann, what do you think?
I mean, I expected that to be the answer. actually, my interesting point is, I've been speaking about it recently, and Tesla has a very interesting name for the unit that does energy storage. It's called stationary power. And so I actually voted for number 3 because electric vehicles are non-stationary power units. And in one way, shape, or form, I actually see that the future grid, I don't know how people will implement this that are way smarter than I am, but EVs will become home energy storage, except they'll also be your business storage and your grocery store storage and everything else around it. And tangentially, I actually think that one of the things I always found interesting, and I think this is why it's going to have a big impact on solar, if I'm a utility and someone says, I want to interconnect my 5 kW system on my house, I would say, fantastic, here's a car charging station for your house. Here's the level 1 charger. Go buy an electric car. You know, it's a great idea for you because they lose some load, but then they increase at the same time. And I think it's the first time in utility history that there's a market shift where utilities can take market share away from from oil companies, as opposed to competing with solar itself. So actually, I actually see EVs and storage to be the same thing.
Okay. EVs sounds sexy, but the latest stat that I've heard is there are roughly about 750,000 electric vehicles around the world and 1.2 billion combustion engines. And so with the deck stacked heavily in the old technology's favor, it's a little bit hard to believe that EVs is going to really move the needle over the next 10 years, although I am a Tesla fan, although I'm not an owner. Storage was actually a default choice for me. It all depends. I think this is probably a little bit more of a distributed gen crowd. I'm not sure. For utility scale, the ability to base load storage, solar with a storage product would be absolutely huge. It would be a game changer if we can get the costs to a point where it can also be extremely competitive. In the home, I think the off-grid vision of cutting the cord is probably a little bit more than 10 years away, although I think it's going to start to be a trickle. When it becomes a flood is really hard, and you can be sure that the 3,300 utilities in the United States are going to be fighting tooth and nail, so that's a little bit hard. It's more likely that this really becomes important as backup or load shifting in residences and in C&I, where I think it has more promise, and that's why I voted for number 1.
I did vote with the crowd on this one, A, and I think it's both an aspirational answer and also it's kind of the imperative, right? So if you kind of throw into the pot the fact that we have this really aging grid infrastructure, you add in a dash of ever-increasing demand by residential and commercial consumers, and then you throw in more than a handful of the intermittent resources that we all in this room spend our time and energies to deploy, I think what emanates out of that pot is a strong call for energy storage to really make sense and leverage those resources in a smart way. So aspirationally, I said 1.
Greg, I think you're in a really good position to answer this question, given Vivint Solar's position.
I'm learning along the way. I'm getting the right answer by the time you finally get to me. I also voted for energy storage being a residential solar company, but I don't think you can say storage without also looking at demand response and real-time ability to do load balancing, the ability to not just generate and create energy, but the ability to determine how it's consumed. And so 1 with an attached to 4. How's that?
Fair enough. Moving on. So this is about cost reduction and drivers, and I think it's a pertinent question just given the response we had to the first question, which is the most important factor for solar's continuing growth is continued reductions in system and levelized costs. So the question is, what would be the most influential driver of this continuing cost competitiveness for solar over the next 5 years? So number 1 is module costs, the historical factor. 2 is other hardware costs, including things like trackers, racking systems, inverters. 3 is innovative financing models, which you've already seen have had quite an impact on the US market. Number 4 is customer acquisition costs, being talked about increasingly these days. And number 5 is none of the above. So once the timer starts, you can start voting on that. Oh, music.
There we go. Instant feedback.
Now we have something like a normal distribution. So I'm sort of pleased. Again, I think this is another indication of how sophisticated the audience is. I mean, naively, in solar, if you knew that module costs were the sort of most important historical factor, you might be tempted to say that. But there's a smallish minority that voted for number 1, and then 2 and 3 are clearly the most popular options. So hardware costs, financing models actually just wins the debate. And again, customer acquisition costs also healthily placed. So this suggests that the way forward is very different from the path that solar has taken in terms of those drivers. So Yann, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Sure. So I voted for number 3, and I think the innovation needs to happen. And the reason I didn't vote for number 2 is from a commercial solar standpoint. There's only so low that product hardware can go. And we're reaching the asymptote of 0 on some of these things very quickly, right? So people still have to make money. And if they don't make money, then they're going to go out of business, and that's obviously not good for the industry. But the innovation on the financing that's actually interesting to me is, so Shale showed on residential how many customers could be acquired, or how large the market was. So we need to find innovation to access more customers. And on the other hand, we also need to find innovation that bridges the gap between acquiring the customers and sort of the yieldco frenzy. How is this aggregation facility happening? As costs come down, one of the negative aspects of that is our dollar scale is going down. So I couldn't point, I was asked on Twitter this weekend, how many billion-dollar solar projects happen today? And yeah, I can point to some in the past, but individual projects today would be very difficult to reach to $1 billion. So we need to figure out a way to aggregate those systems to reach that $1 billion scale from a financing market.
Neil.
Okay, I also voted with the crowd just in number 3, just edging out number 2. But for me, it was very close between 3 and 4. A couple of comments here. First of all, number 3 would have, I think, been a bigger choice of the crowd if you just said financing rather than innovative financing models. Because in financing, there's actually 2 parts. It's the model, which is absolutely correct, and it's also scale. So there's only been one company out there that has actually been successful in securitizing the core of lease or loans. And we're going to see a lot more of that over the next few years. We're going to be beholden to the rating agencies, and we're going to have to move from BBB up to AAA over time, a AAA SF rating, and that's going to ultimately lower the cost. That's going to take a long time, and it's going to involve financing models as well as actually scale. Customer acquisition costs, Solar City reports, I don't know, Greg, what your numbers are, 57 cents is their customer acquisition cost. Well, if you look at Germany as the market leader, I think, if I recall correctly, that residential all-in cost to the customer is $2.22. Their market penetration is probably more than 10 times per capita what it is here, and all-in cost to the customer in residential is about $4 in the U.S. today. Your numbers may show a little bit more, but roughly our numbers are showing about $4. So we have a long way to go, and I would hope that companies can make money along the way, and that Yann is too pessimistic in saying that we're close to the asymptote here. I think we have a lot more to go, and it's actually going to be across all of those. It's going to be financing, and it's going to be customer acquisition costs, which I think, but all of them are going to count. Right,
and so just to bring up the module issue, you don't see some sort of disruptive step function enabling technology in the next 10 odd years coming up? Any companies in your portfolio?
I mean, I could be pitching that, so you know, I'm a tennis player, so I call that a lob. There are some things that are going on, and I'm not just going to pitch my own company. In the module cost, I made for the first time in my life, I made a front page, the equivalent of the Wall Street Journal, but it was in Icelandic, and it was in Iceland about 3 weeks ago, so you may not have heard about it. We're very close to breaking ground on one of the largest polysilicon plants in the world, which is going to cut the cost of polysilicon in half to about $10 all in. But again, to be a little bit more humble about it, you know, it's roughly, I think, about 17% of the total all-in cost, and so we're probably going to be able to shave about, and frankly, it's in my interest to be able to capture as much margin as possible. So we like that there are higher cost producers because we're going to hopefully be able to make a lot of margin. But eventually, over time, the cost of the modules will come down, and so that's the company in our portfolio that is the closest to doing something that has not happened in this industry before.
And that would be Silicor Materials.
That's Silicor Materials. That's correct.
Sarah, I'm not going to die wondering how you voted on this question.
You'll be surprised. I didn't take the lob on this one. So I'm going to take up more than my fair share of airtime on this question, and I promise I'll be brief and uninteresting on other questions that I'm less passionate, but this one I really care a lot about. So if you look at the Sunshot Roadmap document, you'll see that the authors identified as the primary pathways for cost reduction, 2 items. And they were basically 3 and 4, innovative financing models and customer acquisition costs. And I think by and large, the authors got it right. But I want to push us to go a little bit deeper, because I think there's kind of a grander ill here that if we can cure, will really help us kind of take that next leap in terms of cost competitiveness. So what stands behind financing models and customer acquisition costs is business model, right? And I'm just going to make it kind of painfully clear what I mean here. So if you're a TPO and you have a large fund to acquire residential solar leases, and you're racing till 2016 to acquire those customers, you're going to pay a lot for those customers. It makes sense for you to do that. And you have the rich solar lease contracts to fund that acquisition, right? So your business model behooves you to pay in a certain way. So a high customer acquisition cost that we're seeing is nothing more than the big players kind of paying up for growth, right? It's how their business model forces them to act. That business model installs 1 out of every 2 systems in the residential solar space. There's a different business model that installs the other system, the other 1 out of 2, and that's the pure play solar installer. If you're a pure play solar installer, you have to make payroll, you know, every 2 weeks based on the money in the bank. You're very happy with 30% growth, and you don't lose a single night's sleep over customer acquisition costs because you're growing organically through referrals. So here's the truth, right? Solar doesn't have a customer acquisition problem. The business models that deliver third-party ownership have a customer acquisition problem. Solar, thanks to platforms like Sungage's and others, doesn't have a financing problem. Third-party ownership has a high cost of capital financing problem, right? So I think for us, really the opportunity here is to move beyond the current business models and to really enliven all parts of the value chain to the benefit of cost.
Right.
So I believe we're still going to see advancements in the hardware. You're going to see improved optimization. You're going to see not Moore's Law like you have in IT, but Swanson's Law. So I would anticipate that you're going to see reductions in hardware. You're going to see people take the vertical stack. You're going to see integrations of those different pieces of technology. So we anticipate and are seeing, as we work with our partners, reductions in hardware. But I'm going to say number 4, customer acquisition cost. You know, 40% is hard cost, 60% soft cost. And there's a different business model that needs to be created to address the different customer types. Our cost for customer acquisition, the CAC, is 45 cents in Q4. So we lead in that area, and that's something that we're focused on, is building systems, models, and back-end infrastructure to lower the overall cost, because that's the biggest component that still needs to be reduced. And so I vote for number 4, customer acquisition cost.
Okay, so it seems that 3 and 4 were the most popular choices with our panel, and they were also quite popular with the audience as well. So for our next question, I'm going to, let's move in reverse order now. So let's turn the spotlight on Greg first. And this question concerns the size of the global solar market. So in 2014, GTM estimates that 41 gigawatts of solar was deployed or installed. Questions about 2020. So how large will the global solar market be in terms of annual installations in 2020? And option 1 is less than 50 gigawatts. It's a very depressing reality if you only grow 9 gigawatts between 2014 and 2020. But you know, it's a scenario. 2 is between 50 and 75 gigawatts. 3 is 75 to 100 gigawatts. And 4 is more than 100 gigawatts. So let's start the timer. Okay, a lot of optimism in this crowd. I like it. Yes. We're at Solar Church here. So, overwhelmingly, 3 and 4. That's, am I doing my math right? 90+% of the audience went with 3 and 4. Clearly a lot of optimism. So, Greg, please share with us how you voted.
So, like everybody else, I drink the Kool-Aid. In this case, it looks like it's purple Kool-Aid. Very optimistic about what's happening in the market. I actually voted number 3, taking a more cautious outlook. I think it was interesting what Tom said today. He was asked to provide a 10-year forecast. Now we're being asked to provide a 15-year forecast when we all would probably agree that in 5 years this industry is going to look significantly different than the way it is today. So I'll just throw a dart at the board and say I'm going to be more cautiously optimistic than what you have at Green Tech Media. I go with number 3.
Okay. Sara.
I also said 3. I think, you know, the smarter people than me that run the numbers and come out about 75 gigawatts. You guys have clearly, you know, done your spread on that. And so I went 3, feeling like we've continued to outperform what the so-called experts believe we're capable of. So I said 3.
I will be contacting you all in 6 years, though, to catch up, by the way. Neil.
I voted with my fellow panelists here at number 3. As I look around the world, there are really 2 markets that I think can lift us over 100 gigawatts, and that's actually the U.S. and India. I have, you know, I believe that India is going to happen, but I do not believe the rosiest forecast coming out of the government about what they're going to, where they're going to get to. And the U.S., it really all depends upon behind the meter. If we get the kind of disruptive change that's slowly building, and that Greg and actually I think a number of us on this panel are investing with their wallet and their feet on our feet, we can get there. But that's going to take a lot of effort, and we're going to have to change the mindset of utilities and the consumer to go for it in a very big way.
So 3 for 3.
Oh, no, I'm going with number 4.
Oh boy, this had to be different.
So, you know, it has to be number 4 because I mean it's just there's so much growth happening around the world, and we actually haven't reached what I call sort of the precipice of solar getting to the user. So if you look at most other markets outside of the US, so we operate in 15 countries, and pretty much all of them except for the US operates behind the meter, direct deals with utilities and feed-in tariffs, export tariffs, et cetera. But they're all transitioning very rapidly to behind the meter. And that is where the utilization and the energy usage actually sits. So even though Germany is sort of like plateaued at 1.6 gigawatts on an annual basis, you'll start seeing this momentous growth in many markets where solar on an unsubsidized basis is actually lower than the utility cost today.
Right. And I think, as Sara mentioned, I think if I'm correct, the GTM forecast is number 3, somewhere in between 75 and 100 gigawatts. But you know, making that point that, you know, historically, all forecasts from everybody about the size of the market looking forward have been extremely conservative, even when they've tried to take that into account. So I think, you know, personally, I definitely think it's going to be 3 or 4. So it's very interesting that you mentioned India, Neil, because our next question is actually concerns that. And the question is, you know, you can actually dismiss the premise here, which is we're taking it for granted in this question that the two biggest markets in 2020 in terms of annual installations are going to be the US and China. So who's going to be number 3 is the question. And the options here are Japan, which installed 9 gigawatts in 2014, making it the second largest solar market. India, which somewhat disappointingly installed a little less than a gigawatt in 2014. Brazil, which is an absolutely sort of sleeping giant right now. The sort of solar surge has just begun there. And again, similarly in Saudi Arabia, which is even further behind, but again has made a lot of, from the policy and incentive front, from the governmental front, has made a lot of interesting noise, at least in the last couple of years, and is going to launch a tender process. Number 5 would be other. So Neil mentioned India, so feel free to once again, dismiss the premise if you don't think that US and China are the two biggest markets. And let's start the timer now. Okay, so an overwhelming response for India here, as I feel Neil may have, influenced the response to this question. So
you give me too much credit.
Clear winner, and then almost on a relatively even keel, we have the other 3 options, which is interesting to me. I thought naively Saudi Arabia would be, sort of almost 0, but it looks like they're all pretty even. So once again, Greg, let's start with you.
So you probably should start on the other side of the stadium here. I'm a U.S. residential solar guy. I have read all the reports. All the data would indicate that India is definitely going to be the 3rd player. But right now I'm 100% domestic, so I'll defer to the expert Neil and Yann. So,
Sara.
For what it's worth, I'll throw my uneducated vote in the ring also for India. I think will is, as so often is the case, really carries the day, and I think the government in India has shown a lot of will, right? If they're going to make good on election promises to give consistent power to all Indians by 2022, I think solar just rises to the top of the list there in terms of how to achieve that kind of political promise. So political vote for India.
Okay. Neil, actually, before, I have a feeling about how you voted, but also, well, go ahead.
Okay, sure. So, we've either tried or have invested in all of these markets. Japan is obviously today's market leader, but given the fact that I think that there's a 50% overhang in supply of power in Japan, it's difficult to believe that Japan will still be up and running at a 9 gigawatt pace in 2020. They would have to ultimately get rid of all their nukes, which they have not yet committed to do. India has double the installed base of power generation and roughly almost 5 times the population. But India has a big problem. It has lots of issues getting out of its own way. It has been less effective than China in mobilizing industry, and it actually has to allow people to make money. And so far, the install costs in India are way too low given all of the risks associated with doing business in India. If it can solve those problems, then India is going to be a juggernaut. And so hopefully Modi will deliver on his election promise, but it takes a lot more than a leader. It's going to take a village, and a pretty large village there.
Right, and if I might get your view for a second on, Modi seems very keen on deploying these, what he calls ultra, mega, giga, or one in some order, giga, mega, ultra.
Yeah, exactly.
And we're talking about, as it indicates, gigawatt-sized projects that are being planned, like in Kashmir and in desert regions.
Yeah, look, I don't want to be critical. Obviously, India needs a lot of power, and it is growing, and it is one of the most interesting economies of the world over the next decade. If I were in his shoes, I would try to unleash market forces. And my guess is he's going to mobilize a lot more capital easier if he were to go, quote unquote, behind the meter, which really for them, because they don't have meters, would really be unleashing microgrids and also all forms of distributed generation paired with storage, paired with diesel. I mean, you can unleash a wave of innovation in capital if you would open up the markets. It's the hardest nut to crack. Building gigawatt projects is really, really hard, given also all that red tape. For him, he wants to move the needle in a big way, and I can understand that, but I would actually let the market take over and figure out from capital providers how you remove roadblocks to capital formation and let the market figure it out itself. That's what I'm doing.
Yann, how did you vote?
So we're in 3 of the countries today. We used to be in all 4, but we've left India, and also why I didn't vote for India, because I think it's very difficult for an international company with a US footprint to do business in India with comfort. I still think it's going to be a massive market, but I actually think that Brazil is the most likely correct answer if the currency piece of the financing can work itself out. But my gut feeling, actually looking at this answer, is I think Saudi Arabia could be the leader, just because from a basis that they have the most financial gain to change their electricity usage from oil to solar.
Right. Yes, I like that you offered a contrarian answer. Thank you. Okay, let's go to the next question. We're running out of time here, so let's get through these quickly. Yes. So this is the question that we have posted on previous sessions a number of years now, and I imagine you will see this question once again next year and possibly the year after that, because this is a question everybody really is wondering about, which is what will happen to the US market in 2017 under the currently envisioned ITC step down / expiration, depending on what segment of the market you're talking about. So number 1 is a significant decline, which we define as being more than 20% down. 2 is a marginal decline, flat to 20% down. 3 is basically a flat market, unaffected by this change in circumstances. Number 4 is a marginal increase, again, between 0 and 20% growth. And 5 is a significant increase. So let's start the timer.
What are responses?
Okay, so this is an interesting curve here. We haven't quite seen it. I think every single curve we've seen here is different distribution. So for a math nerd like me, that's great. So marginal decline is perhaps the most practical answer, and that's what most of the audience went with, almost 50%, and that was followed by a significant decline. So clearly, the audience is concerned about the change in the ITC. So once again, let's start with Greg and take us through your thoughts.
Once again, it's been proven in the past, history is a good predictor of the future. Whenever you have negative policy, it impacts this industry. And so I voted for number 2, so I'm with the audience based off of just the impact that's going to happen with ITC, as well as some of the challenges we're facing with the increased competition with utility companies. And so I think we're going to have a 2 or 3 year period where we need to sort that out. So I'd say marginal decline, hopefully with some of the things that are solar plus as you look into storage and energy management and other things that are out there relative to Internet of Things, that hopefully I'm wrong and it's marginal increase or better.
Sara.
I also said 2 marginal decline. I think it's hard to see a world in which, with the pull-in we're going to see in Q4, and frankly, the collective exhaustion we're all going to feel in this market in Q1 of 2017, I think we are going to see a decline. What I really hope can happen over the next 16 months or so is that amid all the frenzy to really kind of take advantage of the ITC before it goes away, amid all that frenzy, I hope we can take time to figure out how to install solar still more cheaply, more leaner, smarter. I think leaner, smarter financing is certainly a part of that. And, so this morning we announced a partnership with SMA, and I think that came out of a shared desire to, over the next 16 months, really make the residential solar installation channel stronger, more profitable, and ready for what's the cliff to come.
Yeah, not much to add. I also voted for 2. Q4 2016 will probably be the biggest market. The U.S. will be the biggest market anywhere, and it's sort of obvious that there's going to be a wake effect.
Right. Yann?
So before I give you optimism, I'm going to give you some pessimism. It's going to be 1, and it'll be drastic, number 1. If you look at the GTM data, if you look at where this market's sitting, there's a lot of markets we sit at today that are sort of on the cusp, and we're able to create a value proposition for customers that drastically decreases if the ITC is not in play. I think it creates disparity between homeowners that want to own solar versus use third party. Generally, it's a very, very bad thing for solar in the US if the ITC steps down to 10% for commercial-owned systems. That being said, I think politically speaking, it's a very easy path for us to get an ITC extension. Those of you that read my newsletter know I'm adamant supporter of everyone participating in policy. In the US, our economy is driven by capitalism. Capitalism is driven by public policy, and that's just the game, the rules of the game that we play. So it's really a challenge to everyone on the panel, to everyone in the room, that we have to control our own destiny. There's a reason the Koch brothers are putting $900 million, $1 billion plus dollars into the election cycle, because that makes them a ton of money. And if we don't think that the tax credit, which costs on a CBO basis somewhere around $5 or $6 billion a year, is worth 100,000 plus jobs according to SIA, and I believe in that statistic, then we really need to be in that fight, and we need to win that fight. And I think from a congressional perspective, it wouldn't be that difficult to win it. But it will be a very significant decline if we actually let that happen to us.
Right. So the panel going for mostly 2 and 1, which I think is a pretty practical response, as most of you have. And I really want to meet this 1.9% of you who voted for a significant increase. I want to meet you. I want to get to know you, because I want to get some of that positivity in my life. It'd be great. I won't have to go to therapy.
Stand up.
But I think that's all the time. That's all the time we have today. We actually had more questions, and I could do this all day. It's been so much fun. Please join me in giving our panelists a big hand.